to Mrs. Ruiz's class. We're here together for another great math lesson. And this one is titled Feet and Yards. So we continue exploring and learning about measurement. And our objective, boys and girls, for today is students will measure objects in feet and yards. So we're going to practice measuring objects in feet and yards. Feet and yards. You might have heard of the term feet, but yards, that might be a new one for you. So let's think, boys and girls. How are large items such as a football field measured? How are they measured? If somebody wants to measure how long a football field is, how do they measure it? I mean, we learned about inches, and we learned that 12 inches is what we see on a ruler. But look how small inches are. And if you think about a football field, it's so huge. So it really wouldn't make sense to measure it with inches. We measure it with yards, and that's where this comes in. So this here is our yardstick, okay? And it is 36 inches long. So 36 inches long. Now let's look at our notes up here. You can measure in feet or yards. A foot is equal to 12 inches, which is what we've already learned. And a yard is equal to 36 inches. And length can be measured in any direction. So here I wrote 12 inches plus 12 inches plus 12 inches equals 36 inches. And 36 inches is what a yard is. A yard is 36 inches. So if I were to put 3 of these right next to each other, it would equal a yard. 3 rulers is 3 feet, and 3 feet is 1 yard. 1 yardstick is a yard. So this is actually called a yardstick. The measurement that it has is 1 yard, just like 12 inches is called a ruler. And 3 feet equals 1 yard. Now, actually, before I look at this part of the chart, I'd like to refer back to the poster that we talked about yesterday. So yesterday we talked about the inches part, but today I'd like to talk about the feet part, since our lesson is on feet and yards. So feet, if it is abbreviated, you see it there in parentheses, the F, the T, and a period. So instead of writing the word feet out, you could use that abbreviation. And 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. And there I drew some things that you can measure in feet. Now remember, just like I had mentioned in the other lesson, my drawings just reflect some things that you can measure in feet. Of course, there's so many things in this world. There's many things that you can measure in feet. You can measure a door in feet. You could figure out how tall you are, your height is. Usually when you go to the doctor, they will tell you your height in feet once you are an adult. The length of a car, if you want to find out how long a car is. And also a bookshelf. So if you want to find out how tall a bookshelf is, you can measure it in feet. If you want to find out how wide it is, you can also measure it in feet. So those are just some objects to give you an idea of things that we can measure in feet. And here, on this side of our next chart, I'm showing you things that can be measured in yards. So if I wanted to find out how long a football field is, it would make sense for me to measure it in yards. If you ever watch football games and you hear the commentators comment on the game, they talk about yards. That's what they move up and down the football field. They count it as yards. They do not say inches. They do not say feet. They say yards. If you have one of those huge above ground swimming pools, you might want to find out how wide it is. You might measure it in yards because it's a very large object. So you could think of small objects being measured in inches. You could think of medium-sized objects being measured with rulers. And you could think of large objects being measured in yards. And we use our yardstick to measure large objects. So I want to go over a little page that is in your book, but I want to look at it carefully and go over it with you or together. Okay, so let's look at page 651 in the math book. Up at the top it says feet and yards. And here at the bottom it says teacher directions. Discuss each object in the picture. Circle the objects that could be measured with a 1-inch ruler and draw an X on objects that are too big to be measured with an inch ruler. Okay, so here's our ruler. Now we're talking about real life. If you look at that picture, that is a picture of a basketball court, or it looks like it might be an indoor gymnasium. And those are the objects that you would find there. So you find a ball, shoes, a clock, doors, a chair, a sign, the bleachers or risers, there's a window, the basketball hoop itself. I'm not quite remembering what this back thing is called there. But anyway, that's what you would find in a gymnasium or a basketball court. Now, the directions are to circle the objects that would be measured with an inch ruler. So those are objects that wouldn't be too big, okay? Because we know what our inch ruler is like. So I think if I wanted to measure the ball, I would use an inch ruler. So I'm going to circle that. And I know that we practiced already measuring shoes in a previous lesson, and we measured it in inches. We used an inch ruler, so I'm going to circle that object. What else can I measure in with an inch ruler? How about this sign? Yeah, that's not too big. And perhaps the clock. Okay, so do you see anything else there? Maybe the chair. We can measure how tall the chair is or how wide the chair is. So those are the objects that I would measure with an inch ruler. Okay, now I'm going to think about objects that are too big to be measured with an inch ruler. Okay, even though they don't refer to measuring it in yards, maybe some of those objects would be measured in yards because they're too big. So if I think of the floor itself, the court, it's big. I would not measure it with an inch ruler. I would use a yard or yardstick to measure it. So I'm going to put an X right there on the floor. What about the doors? The doors are pretty wide, so I would use yards to measure the door. So I'm going to put an X. What about the risers or the bleachers? They are also a large object, so that is something that would be measured in yards. So I'm going to put an X. What about the basketball hoop and the back part there? I don't know why the names skipped my mind or came out of my head, but it's a large object, so yes, we would use a yardstick to measure that object. And the window is a large, wide window that can be measured in yards. So I will put an X there. Anything else? Okay, yeah, I think we covered pretty much everything. So I hope that you are understanding that we use rulers to measure objects that are smaller, and we would use yardsticks to measure something that is bigger or larger. And one thing I do want to reference, so I want you to think about, just like we use the quarter to reference an inch, this yardstick is about as wide as a door. So we can reference and say, oh yeah, a yardstick is 36 inches long, and it's about the size of a door. So that is a good point of reference, of always thinking in your head or remembering that a yardstick is about as wide as a door. And we have it here that you could measure a door in feet, but we can also say a door is 1 yard long, or wide, I should say, sorry, wide, 1 yard wide or 36 inches wide. Because if you remember, a yard is 3 feet wide, so 12 inches plus 12 inches plus 12 inches equals 36. So we would use this to measure large objects. We could use our ruler to measure medium-sized objects, or our feet, I should say, to measure medium-sized objects. And we use inches to measure small objects. So let's get back to our book, the book that's been so helpful to us in learning all of these great things. So we did page 651 together. So now it's your turn to show me what you learned about feet and yards. You will do page 652, 653, and then of course we always have problem solving for the last page of the lesson, and that would be 654. And like I always tell you, where it says see and show, they always give you valuable information. They pretty much are stating everything that I already told you, that you can measure in feet or yards. A foot is equal to 12 inches and a yard is equal to 36 inches. And lengths can be measured in any direction, meaning you can measure how tall something is this way, or maybe you want to measure how wide something is, and you would go that way. Okay, so I would like for you to practice on those 2 pages or 3 pages that I talked about, 652, 653, 654. And when we meet again, we're going to talk more about feet and yards. So I hope you enjoyed today's lesson and you learned some valuable information. Thank you, boys and girls, and I can't wait to see you. Bye.